Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the latest episode of Free Marketeers podcast. I hope you're all doing well. It's been a few days since we put out our latest episode, but we're back with some new content for you today. Today, I'm joined by Natalia González from Chile. Natalia, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks so much, Chris, and thanks for the Free Market Foundation for inviting me to talk about a very important topic that's going on in Chile, as you're going to say.
No, it's a great pleasure to have you. We sort of, I guess, met through our different organizations' membership of the Global Trade and Innovation Policy Alliance, and I think it's very important for like-minded people such as ourselves to connect around the world and share what's happening in our different countries and find out how we can spread the information, spread the news, and exchange ideas on how to tackle all these challenges, which is interesting that you see these patterns around countries all around the world, how these changes happen with politics and society and economics, and to see how we can analyze them. So, I mean, on that note, I just wanted to mention a bit about your background so that people have a sort of idea of what you do and you can talk about your organization specifically. So, viewers, Natalia is the Director of Legal and Legislative Affairs for Libertad y Desarrollo. She is also a lawyer from the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, and she has a master's in law from the University of Chicago. She is also a Fulbright scholar, also from the University of Chicago. Natalia, why don't you tell us a bit about your background, your organization, what you do, why you got into this kind of thing in the first place? I guess just being a lawyer wasn't exciting enough for you.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I am a lawyer. I worked for several years in the private sector in a law firm, which was my first job, and I learned a lot. It was a great experience. I was in touch with very interesting topics. And as young as I was back then, I was privileged with being involved in very interesting discussions regarding foreign investment, tax issues, also regarding infrastructure projects, mining projects, different port projects, and all that led my career to start studying, of course, the public policies that were related to those topics. I started having an increasingly amount of meetings with the different authorities so as to tackle the different aspects of the agreements and the policies applicable to those agreements. And then the interest sparked, not only to be involved in the application of the regulation, but also be involved in how the regulation is formed, how it is designed, how it's going to be discussed. And so after that, I migrated to the government. I started working for the, in that time, Ministry of Finance. I was an advisor there. And then I was also an advisor in the Ministry of Energy and of Planification. And it was such a very interesting experience to be on the other side, you know, to get in touch with our congressmen, with the policymakers, to analyze the incentives behind every policy. I learned a lot. And due to that experience, and also because of personal issues, I got married, I started having kids. You also start looking for job alternatives that are more compatible with your family. And there was a huge opportunity here at Libertad y Desarrollo. The director at that time, the executive director, invited me to join in, Luis Larraín. And since then, that was in 2012, I've been involved with this institution. I have come back and forth. I've worked in the university in the middle as well. But I feel very, very attached to this institution because of its commitment. Libertad y Desarrollo, it's a private entity, it's a nonprofit entity. We're not financed by any kind of public resources. Mostly we're financed because of our work. We have subscriptions to our different publications and works. And we promote the ideas of a free society. And we do it in a very committed way. We are very involved in discussion of the public policies. We advise congressmen in the parliament that are willing to defend the ideas of a free society and the design of the public policies in that regard. So I'm very pleased to work here to start contributing in this new discussion that we're going to start in Chile in a few more weeks about a new constitution. It's a challenge. I'm not going to lie to you. It's a difficult challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And we need to have our ideas defended, not only by the people that are going to be presented to this constitution convention, but also by institutions like where I work that are going to be supporting that discussion.
So we can get into the main, I guess, meat of our episode today, and our subject of discussion is around the constitutional changes in Chile. I mean, it's not just changes, it's a referendum, I guess one can say. So if you could start off and just explain a bit about the background behind it. I mean, everyone has been so focused on COVID for the last year and a half. In South Africa, we're on the 27th of March, it'll be 1 year of lockdown. So, I mean, all the countries are now heading towards 1 year, and we've all been focused on that. But as far as I understand, the referendum in Chile has been forming for a few years now.
Yeah, what happened is, if you go chronologically back in October 2019, we had a little bit of a crisis here, in the sense that we had a very violent episode that occurred on October 18th, in which many of our subway stations were actually subject to an attack. Up to date, we don't know, or it's not determined if it was a terrorist attack or not. But if you look at what happened, there was more than 20 or 30 stations that were burned using professional elements. And then, since then, there has been a mix of riots, violence, also legitimate manifestations of the citizenship. And when one goes back, you could say, why did this happen? Because when you look at the data, I mean, Chile in the last 30 years has been an example, especially in the region, of a country that has performed very well in many of the indicators. We have diminished our poverty, we have diminished the Gini index. Our development, our economic development, and the growth that Chile has experimented this year is really remarkable. But of course, there's still challenges. However, I don't think those challenges explain what went on in October and since October up to date. The constitutional discussion arose, it wouldn't be fair to say that it arose in that moment, because we have been for years in Chile. There are some groups that are placing the constitutional discussion as a priority. I wouldn't say it was a priority for the citizenship. If you look at all the surveys say that population was worried about health issues, pension funds, security, but not the constitution as a main priority. I would say not even the main. It was in the last places of the surveys until June of 2019. But after all these riots and the violence that took place, what I would like to say is that the politicians reacted in a certain way, in a way that was, I would say, a bit tolerant with violence as a mean to obtain political endings, political objectives. Not everyone, but many groups were somehow or being tolerating or supporting these riots. So several weeks from October 18, 2019, I would say that the political class here in Chile gave an interpretation to that, as if this was something that had to be resolved in a higher level. This was not a public policy issue thing, that this should be discussed in a constitutional level. So the discussion that had been going on in Chile for the last, I would say, 5 years, that certain groups were promoting that our constitution should be severely reviewed, not only being reformed, but being profoundly reviewed, I think took the stand. And we ended up concluding, I mean, we as a society, not we as Libertad y Desarrollo, that there was a constitutional thing. And so the president asked the different political parties here in Chile to agree. It was a very difficult moment here. Really, violence was striking. To agree in the terms of a procedure in which we could start a constitutional discussion in a ruled way. And that's what they did. A technical commission was formed. It was designated several members by these political parties, and they proposed a line of work, a reform to our constitution, our current constitution, to allow a new form, a new manner of discussing a new constitution. Because currently the Chilean constitution has a chapter that talks about how can you reform the constitution, the different quorums that are applicable. But we didn't have a process in which, and this is in the Congress, we didn't have a process in which there would be like a convention integrated by different citizens to discuss a new constitution. And this procedure was introduced in our constitution on December 2019. And in a nutshell, this procedure contemplates different stages. The first stage was a referendum that was going to take place on April last year, but COVID was in the middle. It made move the election until October last year, this referendum. And well, this is the thing that you don't know which is first, like the egg or the hen, but the constitution that was the least of the priorities of the citizens became like one of the first priorities. And because everybody's talking about the constitution, you know, I think that since 2019, in every debate, in every seminar, in every page of the newspapers, you will find constitutional discussion. So of course, it came top of mind. I'm not saying that there are things in our current constitution that that shouldn't be amended. I think some things needed perfection, but this interest, overwhelming interest, I think it became increasing since October 2019. And so in the referendum last year, which is the first stage, the majority of the population, big majority, nearly 80% of the population voted for a new constitution. So that's the first stage. And now we're approaching the second stage, which is now in the 10th and 11th of April, in which we have to elect, the people have to elect the representatives that are going to be integrating this constitutional convention.
That committee that will be put together, do they have a sort of deadline? Can it be indefinite? I mean, for them to take 2 years, 5 years, is there that sort of focus on it? That was the first part of the question. And then the second part is just around, I mean, it's difficult for me to put you on the spot, but what do you think the majority of Chileans want a new constitution to look like? Is it something that's going to, let's, for example, look at the Economic Freedom of the World Index. Do they want the kind of constitution that's going to push their government down the index or up the index, you know?
Yeah, those are very interesting questions. When the Congress approved this procedure on 2019, this procedure, I have to say, it has, I would say, pretty much fair rules. You know, there's a ruled procedure in which this convention will start working. It has a maximum period of 1 year to not only resolve about a new text of a constitution that will be proposed to the citizens in a new referendum at the end of this procedure, so that the people can say we approve or we do not approve this new constitution. And I say maximum 1 year because the current term is 9 months. It can be extended for 3 other months. But in that term, not only the new constitution has to be elaborated, but also this convention has to elaborate the rules of their own functioning. When I say that the rules that were approved by Congress are fair enough, it's because they have certain limits. For example, this convention it's not considered a sovereign convention. So it has to be guided by these rules. It has to respect, for example, international treaties that Chile has already subscribed and that are ratified by our country. And many other different things, like we cannot alter the fact that Chile is a democratic republic. So it has certain limits, considering especially the experience of other constitutional conventions that took place in Latin America and that didn't end fairly well. Especially the case of Venezuela was very enlightening. The case of Colombia, which ended well, but we also looked over there to the difficulties and the challenges that it presented. So I would say the rules are fairly stated. And as to the contents, you know, I think the main problem that we have currently today is that the discussions are very confused, because you have a public policy level discussion, and then you have this constitutional discussion. And the Constitution aims to be a larger framework, you know, principles, main rules, but it shouldn't go into the detail, that's my perception, about how different policies should be adopted in the future. That's part of the democracy and the democratic governments in the future to be resolving, and the people will be electing which program is more attractive to them. So there's one problem there, that today I think the discussions are very mixed and very confused, especially if you consider that this year is also an electoral year for Chile, where we're choosing at the end of the year a new president, a new Congress. So, I mean, the possibility that the levels of the discussions get mixed up, it's very high. You know, the original process wasn't designed this way. As I was saying before, it should have started in April last year, and the convention should have been already working by now, so that by November and December, by the elections, we would be almost ready. But that didn't happen. Everything moved about COVID. So now the two processes are going to be more or less parallel. And then I would say the other thing that we need to resolve as a society, and I think it's until today very unclear, and that presents a huge challenge, is that for several years, I would say certain academics have started, again, confusing discussion about public policies that are very relevant to the people. I mean, for example, social and economic rights, the right to have social security, the right to have health, the right for the liberty of labor and freedom, the right perhaps to a household. Those discussions that I would say have a base, of course, in the Constitution, in our current Constitution, in the sense that certain rights are recognized, but our Constitution open alternatives in the sense that they're not only provided by the state, but also the private initiative can come in, and that's a good recognition, because at the end of the day, you have to think that the state is at the service of the people, and at the service of the people, we have to think which is better for the people. The state is not enough alone. And so it's good that the private sector can complement in a regulated fashion the provision of those rights. But today, as I was saying, the different issues are mixed up. So many people are seeing in the Constitution the solution or the great solution for the gaps that today we have in health issues, in pension issues, in household issues. So there's, I would say, a huge expectation. I'm not saying in everyone, of course, people that are more into the discussion, academics, they know that that's not the role of the Constitution. But I would say a large percentage of the Chilean population believes, and because of the political speech, it's also very confusing, believes that the Constitution plays a fundamental role, and that it could be a change in their lives. It will shift this somehow economic model that has been, as I was saying before, a huge success, but for many people, it has created also inequalities, and they believe that they're going to find the solution in this new Constitution, which I think it's not going to be like that. And it's a risk to present it like that, because I don't know how it's in South Africa, but today in Chile, the confidence that the people show towards political estimates, like the Congress, like political parties, is very low. And so creating these great expectations and then not being able to fulfill them, it's only going to complot against those same, the people that are promoting these ideas. So I would say those are very important risks in the debate today, and hanging from that, well, what's going to be the role of the state and of the private sector in this new Constitution? I would say that it would be fair to say that an important majority, center majority, agrees that our openness to the world, the globalization, our economic institutions have worked fairly well. We have challenges, but they have worked fairly well. The problem is that today, and I think it's around the world, those are not the leaders of the discussion. Leaders of the discussion are more radical, are more extremist in their statements, and I guess those are the guys that are having more tribune in the press, in social media, and that's a huge challenge, not only because of the agreements that have to be adopted in this convention, which has a high quorum, it's 2/3, for approving the norms, which is good. I think 2/3 ensures the stability and the level of agreement that has to be in any constitution. But it's not enough. It's not an enough safeguard because of the quality of the debate today and because of these extremes that are pushing the discussion towards formulas that I would say in other countries have been proven to fail.
I think a lot of the debate nowadays in the majority of countries isn't about what role the state should play. It should be about what the state should give us, kind of thing. It's not about the agency of the state or not. It's about what powers do we want to give the state so that it can give us housing, electricity, mobile data. That's a big thing in South Africa, is data, that sort of thing. And I think you're right to point out the dangers of isolationism and some extremism. I think after COVID, that's going to be a big challenge for a lot of us to try and fight against those sorts of things. I think we see the benefits of trade and specialization and connections. It's not just goods and services, but exchanging ideas and expertise and that sort of thing, and the dangers that can happen if countries erect all sorts of borders and tariffs and barriers and that kind of thing. I wanted to ask you, and it might be difficult to say, but is there any pressure from countries around Chile to go in a certain direction, from politicians? I mean, one would think that the politicians in Venezuela might have a certain vision for Latin America, but maybe they're focused on their own problems too much. They can't really focus on anything outside their own borders. Is there any element of that, or do governments sort of want to leave Chile to sort out their own process, and then afterwards they'll deal with whatever new sort of system arises?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much independent. I mean, our country is facing this, and I think that this convention, that it's going to be mainly integrated by representatives of the different political parties that are currently now in Chile. There are some rules to promote independence, also to integrate this convention, but to be really honest, I think that it would be mainly conformed by people that are members or are somehow friends with these political parties. So it's going to work pretty much in a similar way to what our House of Representatives works. And yes, I mean, in some sense, of course, our neighbors in the region, Argentina, Venezuela, of course, there are some ideas that come from those ideologies that are now prevailing in those countries that are shared by some of our politicians, and that they're going to try, of course, to make them through in this convention. But then there are these other political parties that I would say are committed with ideas of a free society, committed with the ideas of private initiative, committed with the ideas of having the right to have a regulated but a free economic activity, you know. So it's going to be, I think, because of the 2/3 quorum, it's going to be a discussion that will push for the different members to achieve agreements. But of course, no one's going to get it all. Everybody will have to be able to release some of their expectations. But as I was saying before, I think that the major risk is trying, because at the end of the day, politicians react to how the society is perceiving them. So I think the major challenge during this month is trying to move the vision of our society to one that is friendly with these ideas of a free society. Because today, I think that's at stake. As I was saying before, many people are kind of convinced that the state should play a larger role in many of these social and economic rights issues. But fewer people will question if the state is efficient in providing those public goods, if it's a modern state or not. This is something that it's always in the debate. Like everybody says, we have to modernize our institutions, we have to make the state more efficient. But at the end of the day, when you look at the current policies, it's like declarations, and there's some lines moving in that direction. But then, since these are long-term projects, many politicians simply like don't see the rewards during their mandate of promoting this kind of things. So it's things that we're like moving forward without really tackling them. So I would say that that's the bigger challenge, like to make the people see how much we have improved in this 30 years. As you were saying, globalization, not only in economic terms, but when you sign, for example, free trade agreements, that also imposes the relevant jurisdictions a series of obligations in which they have to improve their institutions as well. And that has been great in Chile. For the past 30 years, we have improved our state institutions, the way that they interact. We have raised our standards in many ways, so as to be able to enter into clubs as today we are, like the OCDE, you know. But at the same time, this has the other side, is that people say, okay, we are almost moving to be a developed country, or we were, because after COVID, you know, we have moved backwards very much years. I mean, 10, 15 years perhaps. But then people say, okay, this country is moving forward, but not everyone is seeing the positive repercussions of that. And of course, we have a challenge there, but that doesn't mean that what we did before was wrong. It means that we need to still perfect it. It means that we have to move forward. But today, I think for many people, it means something else. It means that we have to destroy the basis of this successful model. And really, it's like a statement. It's hard and it's more emotional than technical. So I think that's the bigger challenge, like to be able to put in the constitution, in the new constitution, these ideas of a free society, the ideas that the state and its different public powers have to have controls that are placed in favor of the people, in favor of the citizens, of their liberties, of their rights. And that's the message that we should try to install from now on. And we have been doing that, I think, for the last 2 years.
Regarding the current economic situation in Chile, sort of stuff like the debt, government debt, spending, obviously COVID put a lot of pressure on governments in Africa. A lot of governments couldn't do as much stimulus as, for example, the US or the UK, where they could give more grants. In the US, I think it was last week when the latest spending bill was approved, trillions of dollars and stimulus checks and that kind of thing. That sort of thing just isn't feasible in South Africa. We've had a big issue with growing government debt. We'll probably hit 100% in the next 2 years. And then, of course, we've got junk status with our credit rating, so it makes it difficult to pay back the debt. How is that sort of stuff in Chile at the moment? And do you think people are aware of it? I think, yeah, for some people, it's difficult to tie what is in your constitution to policies on the ground. But I mean, what you envision your state to do ideologically is what it's going to implement in practice. And that's going to affect stuff like the debt and that sort of thing. So how is that aspect of things?
Yeah, I think what happened here in Chile when COVID arrived, I think it is a good opportunity to see the fair state of our country today, because our country has been very rigorous in terms of fiscal responsibility. Some years ago, we established like a fiscal rule, which mainly states that our expenditure is also, it's very connected with the level of growth, with the level of income of the country. So we have some rules there that are, I would say, are a model, are very responsible. Despite the rule, of course, I would say since 2009 on, this rule has been partially complied in the sense that Chile has, since then, experimented certain fiscal deficits. We have a deficit today, but it's in the range of the tolerable deficits. Okay, our public debt is very reasonable. It's, I would say, after all this COVID thing, it's going to be near maybe 40%. We were around 20-something percent, 28%. And of course, that has an impact. But what I'm trying to say is that when COVID hit us, Chile, and because of its fiscal maturity and responsibility, was able to react very well. We had we had the possibility, the government had the possibility, because of the savings it had, to go and help and assist the people that were having a really bad time. Credits were promoted, subsidies were promoted. We also used instruments that were currently in place. For example, they promoted a labor law protection, which used funds that had been gathering and saved for years by the people, and also supplied by fiscal support for people that in some point of the time lost their jobs. They can go to this fund. So this fund was used now by people not only losing their jobs, but that were in a condition that their companies were suspending the labor contract, so they could use these funds to sustain themselves for some months. And as I was saying before, lots of credits for not only SMEs, but also big companies were provided by the state. So I think our history, our fiscal responsibility, our central bank being autonomous and recognized in that quality in the Constitution, has provided a framework, a serious framework, a good framework for Chile to react very well in this pandemic. I think data shows that Chile has been the country in the region that has provided the most aids to the people. So that's a very important lesson for the Constitution, for this discussion. Because, for example, all these social and economic rights, you can have a beautiful declaration in the Constitution, but if you don't have the resources, the fiscal resources, and you don't have the private initiative also collaborating, they will just stay in a declaration with the frustration of the population. And I think that not only that, fiscal responsibility, sustainability, but also how the different public powers interact. When you have, for example, social and economic rights that are recognized, and then if they're not fulfilled, you have these judicial actions to make them be complied. The problem with that is that, and we have seen it already in Chile, is that sometimes our courts of justice are acting as if they were the designers of the public policy, and they're not. And that's an issue, and we have to take care of that, and we have to be very responsible if we're going to give a constitutional action to the people to comply, to make the state comply, or if we're going to say, okay, there's some duties of the state in this matter, of course, but we're going to leave for further democratic legislation, not constitutionalism, legislation for the congresses of the future, for the governments of the future, to responsibly and I would say gradually provide this public goods in different laws in a way that we can really fulfill the expectations. Like you could, for example, today we have the state aiding in the Chilean's pension fund system is based on mainly on private savings, and then the state also collaborates a lot with the people that cannot do those savings because they have low incomes, they don't have a job, and this aid has been being amplified in the last years, and today there's a discussion of this pension fund reform in the Congress, in which the state is also is going to be putting even more money to not only get to those that are very low income people, but also to the middle class people, and that's the way I think we should do it. We should be gradually, perhaps incrementing those benefits in when it makes sense with our fiscal accounts, because otherwise it's just a dream. It's not going to be fulfillable. So I think those discussions, like fiscal responsibility, the capability of the state to react, and what we have seen in the in this COVID moment should be, I'm not saying it's going to be, unfortunately, but should be enlightening to the Constitutional Convention to have a sense of reality of what it can do and what it cannot do, and to have a sense of deference with future government and democracies.
When you talk about social and economic rights, I just wanted, and this can be a quick one, but in your context, what would those look like? So in my mind, that to me sounds, stuff like housing, for example. Would it be the same sort of thing in Chile?
Yes. I mean, we have like the classical liberties and economic rights, like, I don't know, property rights. We also have like the right to start a business, all those rights, the rights to I don't know, to have a fair taxation system that would not be disproportionate, because that would also clash with the property rights. Those rights are in one place, I would say. And I would fairly say that many of them are not in question. However, there are some details which are very important, they're not minor, that are questioned in those rights. But then there's this other package, which I would say are the kind of rights where the state does not act negatively, but where the state has to provide, And these rights are, as you were saying, social security, health, education, and today there's a discussion about perhaps household. There's a discussion about the right to have certain alimentary subsidies or rights recognized in the Constitution. And are in those rights that I believe we're going to spend a lot of the discussion of the Constitutional Convention. Of course, our government regime is also going to be put into place. We have a presidential regime, which has shown, if you look at our last 30 years, it has proven to be a fair regime. It has things that have to be improved, especially the relationship with Congress, which is no collaborative, I would say today. It's like a clash of powers. And we have to improve certain tools there to make it more collaborative. And there are tools to do that. But then some people say, no, like the regime is the problem. So we have to move to another kind of regime, maybe a parliamentary one, which might work very well, but are I would say, farther away from our idiosyncratic way to look at politics. So as to the rights, I would say that discussion is going to be very important, because there you can synthesize many of the things that we have been talking about. The role of the civil society, the role of the state, fiscal responsibility, how much will the Constitution try to be a maximalist constitution, or would it be respectful with future democracies?
Before we wrap up, I wanted to know if there was one clause, one sentence, I mean, it could be a paragraph or an essay, but that you think that you want in the new constitution that you would feel, can like really count as a victory kind of thing. For South Africa, when a new constitution was formed here, a big part was the protection of private property rights, of property, that sort of thing. There was the temptation to lean very much, I guess, to an active government and courts and that kind of thing in terms of giving all these rights. So all those sorts of protections, especially around property, was a big deal. And that's under threat now, because we might amend our constitution to allow for expropriation without compensation. So I'm wondering if there's anything that, if you could get it in, you'll hang up your coat and you'll say, okay, I can retire now.
That's a very difficult question, because I think in every topic there are things that I would love to be able to hang the coat. But I would say that I think the main discussion here is going to be about how are we going to make sure that the Constitution has a reasonable framework to allow the private sector to do their job, to allow juridical certainty in terms of many rights, property rights, the right to associate, the recognition of those organizations and associations to fulfill their objectives, their mission, and the recognition that it's the state at the service of the people and not otherwise. And what instruments are we going to then promote in the Constitution to make that principle or statement true? As I was saying before, efficiency, efficacy, fiscal responsibility are ideas that should be around our Constitution. All these rights that today we have already gained as a society, as individual citizens, I don't think we should throw them on board. We should maintain them, and we should perhaps perfect them. We should perfect the institutions that make those rights feasible. But but we should not go a step backwards to say the state should be necessarily bigger. I'm not saying it should be necessarily smaller, but what I'm saying is that it should be a better state. And that's, and I mean, and again, like people sometimes lose the main objective. Like the Constitution at the end of the day is a way to ensure people that the power is well organized and well distributed, so that we, each one of us, can live our lives as freely as we can without unnecessary interventions, without unnecessary disruptions from the public powers. I think that if we manage to somehow do that, I would say it would be a fairly well-constructed constitution. But if we don't, and we are putting the focus on this more of a public policy issues in the constitution, and if we insist of increasing powers to the public authorities without putting the controls, without putting the relevant counterparties, then we're going to be in a problem.
I think you raise a very important point, because I think around the world, people, and maybe even ourselves, from our perspective of working with these ideas, we don't appreciate the progress that has been made, and just how fragile progress and liberty is, and how easily it can be thrown away. I mean, we think it'll take, you know, it took Venezuela a couple of years, but once that sort of stuff is gone, it's gone, and it's very, very difficult, if ever, to win back. It happened in Zimbabwe, happened in Venezuela, and you can't underestimate just how important these things are. So you shouldn't, as you say, you know, simply get rid of them because they haven't delivered all the goodies that you want sort of overnight, kind of thing.
Yeah.
My final question to you was, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I think another also very important, like, common convention that we should really, really enforce is that democracy has its methods to resolve the different challenges that are dynamic and that are always changing in societies. Yeah. But are those institutions, not violence, not other methods that we thought we had already thrown away because we had a conviction that that was not the way to resolve our differences in society. One of the main challenges that this convention is also going to confront is how is it going to deal with a violent environment that is going to be perhaps surrounding this convention. As I was saying before, since October 2019, and although it has diminished, this violence that has taken many of the important cities and districts in those cities is a threat. It's a threat not only for the people, not only for commerce, not only for people trying to live their lives normally, but it's also a threat because many politicians are tempted by these movements as a way to resolve conflict. And that is something that we cannot tolerate.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. I wanted to ask you another difficult question, and you can decide how you answer it or not answer it. But what does your gut tell you about the direction that it's going to go? What does your instinct tell you about how it might shake out? I know obviously you want it in one direction. I mean, if we record another episode in 20 years time, 50 years time, are we going to be happy or not?
Look, as I was saying before, I think the rules are fairly well designed to have a reasonable constitution, to end up with something that looks fairly well. However, I must say, and I think it's honest to say, that the level of the discussion today is very deteriorated. So despite the fact that I think that those that are behind the ideas of a free society have organized well and are going to this election together, and that in our electoral system is a good thing, because our electoral system somehow gives a prize to those that go together and that not go separate in different little groups. And that is a good news for people like me that see in these representatives the conviction for defending these ideas. However, as I was saying, the debate is so deteriorated that we cannot today make we do not have an assurance that all those representatives are going to behave fairly in the same direction in every topic. You know, I would say For example, I can imagine that they will go for an autonomous central bank, that they will defend property rights, that they will, I don't know, have, of course, a judiciary system that it's independent and that has its controls. All those things, I think, can be fairly say, you can fairly say they're going to work well. But on this economic social rights issues that we were discussing before, I'm not sure that the level of conviction it's enough. I'm not sure if the people that represent these ideas are really believe that the instruments that we are promoting for those rights to be fulfilled in the future are the right instruments, or they're going to be inclined to certain populism, certain ideas that seem less complex, but that they're not. And as I was saying before, the thing that of having this electoral career for president and for congressmen at the same time that this convention is going to be working, and at the end of the day, it's the same political parties in both. That presents certain challenges that I think I cannot say today that they're going to be fairly resolved, even with the 2/3, because in those topics that are more sensible to the people, that are more emotional to, I wouldn't put my hands on fire to say that we're solved out. No, it's a challenge.
Fair enough. I think that was as good an answer as you could give. It's an incredibly complex and difficult situation, and I think you've managed to give us a lot of information and insights into how things currently stand and what's at stake. And one can only hope that as much of the right stuff is thrown in, the right ingredients, and not the ingredients that will push the country down the route of so many others, unfortunately. And hopefully, if the right sort of things get done, it can be a lesson to countries like South Africa and what they should do with their constitutions or not do, where you have the constant rise of populism in different ways from the left and the right, and how you deal with that and how you deal with those challenges. But I think we'll wrap up on that note. We've covered quite a lot of ground. So Natalia, we have to thank you for your time. Thank you so much for being with us today.
No, thanks to you for the invitation, for the Free Market Foundation. And I hope that we can be talking during all this process. I mean, you already went to South Africa in a similar process several years ago. And as you were saying before, being part of alliances also help us to exchange experiences that can enrich other countries that now are facing similar challenges.
Yeah, we'll make sure to link to your website and your social media in the description. So viewers and listeners, to those of you who want to follow Natalia's work, please use those links below. A reminder, of course, that we have our current annual fundraiser going on. You can find the link to that in the description as well. We greatly appreciate any support that you can give us, any financial support. So please consider giving to our fundraiser. A reminder that you can find our articles and press releases all on www.freemarketfoundation.com. Please share our articles and press releases on your different social media channels. And a final note, if you haven't yet by the end of this video, please remember to like the video, and please also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We greatly appreciate all of your support that we get on our videos. On that note, we will end for today. We have a lot more content coming for you in the next few weeks, so keep an eye out for our channel. We'll talk to you all again very soon, and take care. Bye-bye.